The seaweed industry serves as a model of human-environment nexus, especially when looking at the interactions between socio-economic and physical environmental factors that affect the sustainability of the industry. In our recent publications, we explored the social and economic factors governing stakeholder relations in the Philippine seaweed industry. We then assessed sustainability in the context of risks and uncertainties based on the perceptions of key stakeholder groups, the farmers, the traders, and the processors. In this presentation, we discussed the key messages that we have uncovered from our discussions with the industry stakeholders. Through this, we hope that we would be able to bring to light the realities of the Philippine seaweed industry. This study forms part of a larger research program, Global Seaweed Star, which is funded by the UK Research and Innovation through the Global Challenge Research Fund. The program is composed of an international team of researchers and scientists from different institutions in the United Kingdom, the Philippines, Tanzania, Malaysia, and Canada. The Philippines is home to about 800 species of seaweeds, of which the Kapapicus and Eucuma varieties have gained economic importance for its carrageenan content. The technology for commercial production of these two species was successfully introduced in the country in the early 70s and has expanded to different regions, particularly in the southern and central Philippines. In recent years, seaweeds, particularly eucalyptoids, has become one of the major aquaculture commodities, representing 64% of the total annual production. This simply shows the economic importance of seaweeds, particularly to households in coastal communities. However, the volume of eucalyptoid seaweed production fluctuates annually due to environmental and socioeconomic factors. This graph, for instance, shows the intermittent growth and reductions in production volumes in key production areas in the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao or the ARMM, Mimaropa, Zamboanga, Central Visayas, and Western Visayas. The decrease in production affects seaweed farmers and other stakeholder groups because it translates to income losses. These problems do not only stem from environmental factors, but are also influenced by the prevailing social, economic, and political conditions in the industry, which constrains stakeholders' access to resources, services, information, and the market. In this study, we analyzed sustainability in the context of risks and uncertainties. Risk and uncertainty are related concepts referring to events with adverse outcomes. Simply put, risk is characterized by an awareness of the probability and the impacts of an adverse event, while uncertainty involves the lack of knowledge of the characteristics of a potential hazard. A stakeholder approach in risk assessment and analysis is of particular importance when understanding the sustainability of the eucalyptoid seaweed industry because there is a need to take into account the different perspectives of risks and uncertainties across the carrageenan value chain. As such, this study was conducted to identify the varying risks and uncertainties affecting the carrageenan seaweed industry based on the perspective of three key stakeholder groups, namely the farmers, the traders, and the processors. Next is to identify the strategies adopted by the stakeholders to manage these risks and uncertainties, and to use these results in understanding how stakeholder perspectives and actions shape and influence the structure and sustainability of the Philippine seaweed industry. The data used for this study was collected through a series of focus group discussions among women and men seaweed farmers and key informant interviews with traders and processors within the period of August 2018 to November 2019. Purposive sampling was used in selecting the participants for each category. Among the farmers, separate FGD sessions were conducted for women and men participants to obtain gender-specific responses on seaweed production. In each municipality, three villages were selected and two separate FGD sessions were conducted, one for women and one for men. A total of 18 FGD sessions were conducted with farmers, with at least 5 women and 5 men participants for each session. The questions asked were pertinent to their experiences in seaweed farming and the nature of social relations in the seaweed farming industry. The total number of seaweed farmers who participated in the study reached 115 from the original target of 90, which means 10 farmers from each village. Since farmers who expressed interest to participate were not excluded from the discussions, The main data collected include perceived risks affecting seaweed production and coping or adaptation strategies to prevent or minimize the impacts of risks and uncertainties. Five major processors and traders were interviewed to collect information about the market structure, issues affecting trade and processing, and the mechanisms adopted to address the industry constraints. The data was collected from three key seaweed production areas, which include Bohol in central Visayas and Zamboanga City and Tawi-Tawi in Mindanao. The overarching goal was to analyze and understand the key socioeconomic dimensions within the seaweed value chain. Our initial analysis focused on the seaweed farming industry, particularly the power relations between men and women farmers in terms of their access to information, services, and resources. For the next phase, we scaled up our scientific inquiry and included data from traders and processors to identify the risks and risk management activities adopted across the industry. The analysis involved four phases. First is to map the social relations governing the seaweed industry by asking the farmers how they were able to access resources and information. This includes their access to seed stocks, resources such as credit and materials for construction of seaweed farms, and information on seaweed prices and RDS requirements. The second phase was the identification of risks experienced by the farmers, the traders, and the processors. The questions pertinent to perceived risks were non-categorical, which means that the participants were asked to enumerate any types of risks that they have encountered. This is to ensure that all types of risks that were experienced by the different stakeholder groups are recorded, and analysis will not be constrained on what is dictated by the literature. After the data were collected, the participants' narratives were transcribed, and content analysis was used to analyze the manifest content, meaning information and data that were explicitly stated, and latent content or the underlying meanings of the respondents' narratives. Recurring themes on risks and risk management strategies within respondent groups and across sites were identified and categorized based on the risk classifications in published studies, and then these were coded for analysis. The social network analysis revealed some interesting insights on the nature of social relations in the seaweed industry, especially in terms of access to and control of resources essential for sustaining seaweed production. This, for example, is one of the social network maps we have produced in our study, which illustrates farmers' access to market. On the surface, it demonstrates farmers' high reliance on internal and informal networks, especially in terms of selling their produce. However, this relationship supersedes market relations because it also entails access to resources such as funds and information such as seaweed prices and quality requirements. For instance, farmers rely on traders to obtain access to seaweed farm sites, receive financial assistance for farm construction and other financial needs, and to secure access to local markets. Traders and processors, on one hand, rely on farmers to sustain their position in the seaweed industry. Without the production sector, the industry will collapse. However, this does not mean that the industry rests solely on the production sector. Traders and processors have a wider reach in the markets because of their access to resources, and this become essential especially when governance is weak. At the outset, the farmers, traders, and processors relations is keeping the industry afloat. Farmers provide the raw materials, and traders and processors provide the resources. Removing one of these stakeholders in the industry would create an imbalance. For instance, decreasing traders' roles in the market might become a disadvantage to farmers who do not have the financial resources for logistics in order to reach the larger markets. The farmers reported a total of 15 risks in seaweed production, which can be categorized into environmental risks, capital investment and yield risks, and market and governance related risks. Responses that fall into the environmental risk category were disease occurrence, pest infestations, predation, poor weather condition, and pollution, while the issues that affected capital investment and yield were high input costs, seed stock shortage, adulteration, such as the use of chemical inorganic fertilizer and salt, and poaching. Market and governance-related risks included price volatility, poor market access, imposition of market sanctions for non-compliance to raw-dried seaweed standards, and lack of zoning and licensing ordinances. Among the identified risks, disease and pest infestations were the most frequently reported risks. The farmers reported that environmental and capital-related risks result to a decrease in production of seaweeds, specifically raw-dried seaweeds, which is used as a raw material for carrageenan processing. The reduction in volume of harvest contributed to emergence of a group of risks affecting traders and processors. All the respondents believed that instability of seaweed supply was the main problem faced by the trade and processing sectors. During peak season, approximately 60 to 70% of the total storage capacity is utilized. However, the figure drops significantly by about 50% during periods when seaweed supply becomes more limited. The instability in supply, in return, contributed to increased competition among traders and processors, as they contend to obtain steady supply of raw materials to sustain their production. In addition to this, traders and processors need to deal with poor quality of raw dried seaweeds from the sites, usually due to poor farming methods such as adulteration, improper drying, and premature harvest. The second group of risks affecting traders and processors is market and governance related risks, which is closely connected to the same category of risks reported by the farmers groups. Among these risks, price volatility in the global market and lack of government support were perceived as key concerns in trade and processing. These uncertainties contribute to increased mistrust between the stakeholder groups, and while it results to farmers experiencing a similar set of problems. The colored boxes represent the risks reported by the stakeholders. Colored lines link these risks to the corresponding risk management strategies. A total of 10 strategies were reported by the farmers in managing the impacts of risks pertinent to environmental and capital-related risks. These include observing seasonality, variety selection, site suitability, farm technique, trimming and transplanting, farm monitoring and knowledge sharing, premature harvesting, purchase of seed stocks, livelihood diversification, and seeking support services such as credit. Most of the strategies were centered on managing the impacts of disease occurrence, pest infestation, and poor weather conditions. This diagram shows the risk management strategies for market and governance related risks. On the left are the risks reported by the farmers, and on the right are the risks reported by traders and processors. Among the 7 risks reported by the traders and processors, only 3 were reported to be manageable. All the stakeholders reported that the patron-client relations govern the local seaweed industry. The farmers reported that even though access to markets is limited because of the need to maintain market relations with traders, the patron-client system has been beneficial because it enables distribution of support services, therefore augmenting the lack of access to institutional interventions. It also helped in accessing information about seaweed prices. For the traders and processors, maintaining the patron-client system helps address supply-related issues. Processors provide traders with funds to be used for financing farm construction or credit for seaweed farmers, and through this, they are able to secure the supply of raw-dried seaweed. In conclusion, the different risk categories that arose from the respondents' narratives show that each group encountered multiple risks and uncertainties. However, risks affecting the production sector adversely impact seaweed trade and processing due to the reduction in supply of raw materials. Likewise, issues affecting trade and export, such as seaweed price fluctuations, affect local market conditions and stakeholder relations because of changes in supply and demand. Farmers, traders, and processors have adopted the patron-client system primarily to secure their access to market, information, credit, or supply of seeds. It has also been used as a form of informal contract between the farmers and traders and between traders and processors. This information provided a strong evidence on the need to consider a bottom-up approach in the assessment of risks affecting the seaweed industry. Local strategies should not be undervalued as these reflect the differential experiences, patterns of behavior, and decision-making processes of stakeholders across the seaweed value chain. These risk management strategies should be considered in planning and policy formulation, particularly for the improvement of the competitive advantage of the seaweed industry. Lastly, stronger government support is needed to manage the impacts of risks affecting the production outcomes and market efficiency. The lack of government intervention has curtailed the capacity of traders and processors or exporters to engage in product development and diversification. It should also be noted that the stakeholder relations that support the industry pose risks, especially for farmers who lack the capacity and resources to participate in higher income trading and processing activities. Therefore, government intervention is essential across the seaweed value chain to enhance farmers' access to resources and services, to strengthen and expand market relations at local and international levels, and to provide stakeholders with opportunities for product development and diversification.